The first candle sputtered like it had been waiting all winter to speak. Mira paused, breath held, as the wick caught and steadied. Flame bloomed, small, brave, unmistakably alive, and its light spilled across the wooden table, gilding the spines of her books, the scattered rosemary needles, the bowl of milk warming gently by the hearth. Outside, snow pressed softly against the cottage windows, a white hush cradling the world. Inside, Imbolc had begun. She smiled before she realized she was doing it. Imbolc always felt like a secret whispered between the earth and those patient enough to listen. Not spring, not yet, but the promise of it, the long inhale before warmth. Mira loved that most of all, the almost. Her red curls were half-pinned, half-wild, escaping their braid as if even her hair sensed the turning of the year. A wool shawl slipped from one shoulder while she reached for her well-loved notebook, the one with the cracked leather cover and margins stuffed with pressed flowers and hurried thoughts. Candlelight danced across the page as she added one final line to her preparations, ink looping and certain. Light returns. She closed the book gently, like tucking in a sleeping child. Mira's cottage was small, but it breathed. The beams creaked with familiarity, the floorboards remembered her footsteps, and the hearth, oh, the hearth, glowed with the steady confidence of something that knew it had always been needed. Bundles of dried herbs hung from pegs, their scents mingling into something warm and green and safe. Every surface bore quiet evidence of a life lived slowly. Teacups mismatched but cherished, blankets mended rather than replaced, books stacked in joyful, leaning towers wherever there was space. Books were everywhere, some open, face down, waiting patiently. Others lined the walls from floor to ceiling, their spines faded and soft from use. Mira loved them the way some people loved gardens, each one a place she could step into when the world felt too sharp. Tonight, though, her attention kept drifting back to the window. The moon hovered low and pale, caught between clouds like a thought not yet finished. Somewhere beneath the snow, seeds dreamed, roots stirred. The earth remembered the sun, even if the sky still pretended otherwise. Mira moved through her preparations with practiced tenderness. She swept the threshold with a birch broom, murmuring thanks for the shelter it guarded. She set out bread and honey, milk and salt, honoring nourishment and simplicity. Each action felt less like ritual and more like conversation, an old, comfortable rhythm between herself and the turning year. When she knelt to light the second candle, warmth bloomed in her chest, sudden and surprising. Not magic exactly, or maybe it was, but the quiet kind. The kind that lived in steady hands and hopeful hearts. She lingered there longer than necessary, watching the flames lean toward each other as if sharing a secret. Outside, the wind sighed, brushing the cottage walls like fingers along a sleeve. Mira pulled her shawl tighter, then laughed softly at herself. "You're not cold," she said aloud. "You're just feeling things." The words echoed gently, absorbed by the wood and stone. She rose and crossed to her favorite chair, the one tucked close to the fire, its arms worn smooth by years of reading. From the nearest stack, she selected a book almost without looking, a collection of old seasonal tailies, its pages yellowed and smelling faintly of smoke and time. She curled into the chair, tucking her feet beneath her, the book resting open on her lap. But she didn't read yet. Her gaze drifted instead to the door. Imbolc was a threshold after all, a hinge moment, and thresholds had a way of inviting things in, memories, hopes, sometimes even visitors, expected or otherwise. Mira felt it then, that gentle prickle along her skin, the sense of something shifting just beyond sight. Not danger, never that. More like the feeling you get when a story is about to begin its favorite chapter. She turned a page, and as the fire popped softly and the candles burned brighter, Myra didn't yet know that this Imbolc, this quiet, tender night of light and waiting, would ask more of her than simple preparation. Only that it had noticed her, and that it was listening. The book warmed beneath her palms, as if it too were alive. Myra finally began to read, her lips shaping the words silently, savoring them the way she savored honey on fresh bread, slowly, reverently. The stories were old, older than the cottage, older than the path that wound down to the stream, older even than the language they were written in. They spoke of shepherds watching for lambs beneath winter stars, of hearth fires guarded through the coldest nights, of gentle goddesses who walked the land with candlelight in their hands, teaching people to hope again. Every so often, Myra paused, eyes unfocusing as a sentence tugged loose a memory. Her mother's voice, low and steady, reading by firelight. Her grandmother's hands, always warm, guiding hers as she learned her first charm, not to summon storms or bend fate, but to bless bread so it never tasted lonely. The first Imbolc she'd celebrated alone, frightened and proud all at once, convinced she could feel the earth listening. The fire shifted, sending a new wash of warmth across the room. Shadows deepened and softened in equal measure, curling lovingly around the corners of furniture, along the spines of books. Candle wax sighed as it dripped, slow and patient. Myra turned another page. Outside something moved. Not footsteps, no crunch of snow, no sound sharp enough to alarm her, but a change in the air, a subtle pressure, as though the night had leaned closer to peer through the glass. Myra's eyes lifted again to the window. Frost had traced delicate patterns along its edges, ferns and spirals and unfamiliar runes that hadn't been there before. She smiled. "Well," she murmured, marking her place with a scrap of ribbon, "you're right on time, then." She rose and crossed the room, skirts whispering around her ankles. With practiced ease, she placed another log on the fire, coaxing it into flame. Sparks lifted briefly, like tiny stars, before vanishing up the chimney. The hearth responded with a deeper glow, a steadier warmth. Imbolc was not a loud Sabbath. It didn't demand spectacle or grandeur, it asked for presence, for tending, for listening. Myra set a kettle on the iron hook above the fire and added a pinch of dried chamomile and lemon balm. As the water warmed, she hummed, an old tune with no words, passed down the women in her family like a shared secret. The sound filled the cottage, settling into the beams and shelves, stitching everything together. She carried the mug back to her chair once the tea was ready, steam curling upward like a blessing. The first sip softened her shoulders. The second reached somewhere deeper, unknotting a tension she hadn't realized she'd been holding since autumn. Time stretched. The snow outside continued its quiet work, blanketing the world, making everything feel smaller and more manageable. Myra read another story, then another, each one threading warmth into the long night. Occasionally, the wind would rise and fall, the cottage answering with a creak or a sigh, as if it were breathing alongside her. And yet beneath it all, that sense of almost remained. Myra felt it most clearly when she stood again, this time to tend the small altar by the window. She replaced the wilted greenery with fresh sprigs of snowdrops she'd carefully coaxed from the earth earlier that day, their white heads bowed like shy promises. She touched each one lightly, murmuring gratitude. "Not yet," she whispered, "but soon." Her reflection stared back at her in the glass, freckled cheeks flushed with warmth, eyes bright with candlelight and something quieter, steadier. A witch, yes, but also simply a woman who loved stories and soft mornings and the belief that light always found its way back. As she turned away, The kettle gave a soft, unexpected knock, as though nudged by an unseen hand. Mira froze. Not in fear, never fear, but in attention. The room felt fuller suddenly, charged in the gentle way before a storm breaks or a secret is spoken. The candles burned straighter, their flames unwavering. The air smelled sweeter, greener, like thawing soil beneath snow. "Oh," she breathed. She moved slowly now, deliberately, heart thudding not with panic but with recognition. This, too, was part of Imbolc, the moment when the veil thinned just enough for old magic to stretch its limbs, when forgotten things remembered themselves. She set the mug aside and reached for her shawl, wrapping it tightly around her shoulders as if preparing to step outside, even though she remained by the hearth. Her fingers brushed the charm she wore beneath her collar, a simple disc of copper etched with a spiral. It pulsed faintly under her touch. "Easy," she whispered, not to herself but to whatever stirred unseen. "I'm listening." The fire crackled in response. From somewhere deep within the cottage, no, deeper than that, somewhere beneath the floorboards and stone and soil, came a sensation like a knock, soft but insistent. A request, not a demand. An opening. Mira swallowed, her mouth suddenly dry. She had planned for a quiet Imbolc, candles, stories, tea, reflection. But Imbolc, it seemed, had plans of its own. She stepped toward the door, hand hovering just above the latch, heart full of questions she wasn't ready to ask aloud. And somewhere beyond the threshold, beneath snow and sky and waiting earth, something ancient leaned closer still. Mira rested her forehead briefly against the cool wood of the door, breathing in. There were moments, her grandmother used to say, when listening mattered more than knowing. This felt like one of those moments. She lifted the latch. The door opened with a familiar creak, releasing a breath of winter air that slipped inside like a curious cat, cold-nosed, sharp, but not unkind. Snow glittered under the moonlight, untouched and smooth, the path beyond the cottage swallowed by white. The world seemed to be holding still, suspended between heartbeats. Mira stepped onto the threshold, bare feet tingling against the chill of the stone. She didn't cross it. Not yet. Imbolc was about boundaries as much as beginnings, and she had learned long ago to respect the pause between inside and out. The night answered her attention. It wasn't a voice exactly, more a presence, woven through the wind and frost and distant trees. Mira felt it along her arms, her spine, the quiet spaces behind her thoughts. It carried the scent of damp earth and lamb's wool, of smoke and thawing roots, of patience. "I see you," she said softly. The words were not a spell, but they mattered all the same. Somewhere beyond the drifted hedgerow, an owl called, low and steady. Mira smiled again, this time with a hint of wonder curling through her ribs. She stepped back inside and closed the door, careful not to rush, careful not to shut anything out entirely. The cottage welcomed her like a held breath released. She added another candle to the altar, setting it beside the snowdrops. As she struck the match, the flame flared brighter than expected, illuminating the room in a sudden wash of gold. For a heartbeat, Mira could have sworn the shadows rearranged themselves, stretching, bowing, settling into new shapes. She didn't look too closely. Some things preferred to be sensed rather than seen. Instead, she fetched her basket from beneath the table. Inside were the small, humble tools she rarely needed but always kept close. A coil of red thread, a bell no bigger than a walnut, a loaf of bread wrapped in linen, still warm from that morning's baking. She laid them out slowly, intentionally, letting the rhythm steady her hands. This is a tending night, she reminded herself, not a proving one. She rang the bell once. The sound was clear and sweet, cutting gently through the hush. It didn't echo so much as sink down through the floor into the roots of the world. Myra felt the answering hum beneath her feet, subtle but unmistakable, like the earth shifting its weight. She tied the red thread loosely around the bread, not binding it, just marking it, a symbol of continuity, of life that persisted through cold and dark. As she worked, memories rose unbidden. A younger Myra, knees pulled to her chest, listening as her grandmother spoke of Bridget, not as a distant goddess, but as a presence felt in hearth fires and wells, in the hands of healers and poets alike. She comes quietly, her grandmother had said. You won't hear her unless you're already listening. Myra swallowed, throat tight with affection and longing. She hadn't thought of her grandmother in weeks, not properly, not like this. The realization settled warmly over her shoulders, as comforting as the shawl she wore. The kettle knocked again, louder this time. All right, Myra said, a laugh trembling at the edges. I hear you too. She poured a second mug of tea and set it opposite her chair, steam rising as if someone unseen had just sat down. The gesture felt right. Hospitality mattered, even when, or especially when, you didn't know exactly who you were offering it to. She returned to her chair and sat, hands folded loosely in her lap. Minutes passed, or maybe only seconds. Time, Myra had learned, behaved differently when it felt witnessed. The fire shifted, flames dipping low before flaring up again. Candlelight rippled across the walls, and then, softly, unmistakably, she felt it. A presence settled near the hearth. Not embodied, not demanding, simply there like a companionable silence or the weight of a cat curling up beside you without asking. Myra's breath caught, then eased. Her heart slowed, aligning itself with something older and steadier. Words brushed the edge of her awareness, not spoken, not quite thought. You keep the fire well. Tears pricked her eyes, sudden and surprising. Myra nodded, unable to speak for a moment. I try, she whispered. The presence seemed to warm at that, spreading gently through the room, into the beams, the stones, the very bones of the cottage. Myra felt seen, not judged, not measured, but known in the quiet, unremarkable ways that mattered most. Another whisper, softer still. The light is returning, but it needs hands. Myra's fingers curled into the fabric of her skirt. What kind of hands? She asked, barely louder than the crackle of the fire. The answer did not come all at once. Instead, images flickered behind her eyes like the turning of pages. A path buried beneath snow, a stream swollen with meltwater, a lamb's first unsteady steps, a book open to the right line at the right moment. Small things, ordinary things, acts of care strung together like beads. Myra exhaled slowly. Yes, she said, before she fully understood why. The presence lingered, warm and approving, then gradually thinned, like embers settling into ash. The room returned to itself, though it felt changed, as if a window had been opened somewhere deep inside the world. Myra sat there for a long while afterward, hands wrapped around her cooling tea, gaze soft and distant. The night pressed gently against the cottage once more, but it no longer felt empty. It felt expectant. Eventually, she rose and tidied the altar, movements unhurried. She wrapped the bread again, extinguished one candle, left the others burning low. She returned the book to its stack but kept her place marked, certain she would need it soon. At last, she climbed the narrow stairs to her loft, candle in hand. From her bed, she could see the window and the moon beyond it, pale and steady. She lay back beneath her quilts, the scent of smoke and herbs clinging to her hair. Sleep crept in slowly, like dawn arriving in reverse. As her eyes fluttered closed, Myra felt it once more, that sense of almost, of a story leaning forward, waiting for her to turn the page. And somewhere beneath the snow, the earth listened. Myra dreamed of embers. They glowed in the dark soil beneath her feet, winking awake one by one like stars remembering their names. Each step she took warmed the ground, coaxing faint green shoots to curl upward, tentative but determined. She did not hurry. In the dream, she knew better than to rush what was becoming. When she woke, dawn had not yet arrived, but something had shifted all the same. The cottage was very quiet. Not the empty quiet of abandonment, but the deep, listening stillness that followed a good conversation. Myra lay beneath her quilts, eyes open, watching pale moonlight drift across the slanted ceiling of the loft. Her body felt rested in a way sleep alone never quite achieved, as if she had been set down carefully into herself during the night. She pressed a hand to her chest. The warmth she'd felt by the hearth lingered there still, gentle and steady. "Well," she murmured to the rafters, "that answers that." She rose slowly, pulling on woolen stockings and her softest sweater, the one patched at the elbows from years of reading by firelight. The latter creaked familiarly beneath her feet as she descended. The scent of extinguished candles and banked coals greeted her like a memory she could almost place. The fire had burned down to a bed of ash and faintly glowing red. Myra knelt and coaxed it back to life with careful hands, feeding it splinters and breath until flame returned, small but willing. Morning, or what passed for it in winter, would come soon enough. For now, she welcomed the quiet in between. She poured water into the kettle again, then paused. The second mug still sat where she'd left it, untouched, its surface dusted faintly with ash that had no business being there. Myra stared at it, heart giving a small, curious thump. "Of course," she said softly, and carried it to the sink. As the kettle warmed, she opened the door just long enough to scoop in a bowl of snow, pristine and blue-shadowed. She set it near the hearth and watched as the edges began to melt, droplets forming like punctuation marks along the rim. Transformation, even now. She wrapped herself in her shawl and stepped outside. The cold bit gently at her cheeks, sharpening her senses. The snow crunched beneath her boots, loud in the hush of the early hour. The sky was beginning to pale at the horizon, a thin line of silver light stretching cautiously upward. Myra stood still and breathed. The land breathed back. She could feel it now, not just the presence she'd sensed the night before, but its echoes rippling outward. The hedgerow hummed softly, roots shifting beneath the snow. The old apple tree near the stream held itself differently, as though listening for instructions. Even the path seemed less buried, its curve more apparent beneath the white. "You're all awake," Myra whispered, awe-threading her voice. She raised her hands, not in spellcraft but in greeting. Her breath fogged the air. Somewhere nearby, something small scurried beneath the snow, alive and purposeful. Myra laughed quietly, the sound puffing out like a blessing. Back inside, she brushed the snow from her boots and returned to the hearth. The kettle sang. She poured herself tea and carried it to the window, leaning her forehead lightly against the glass. The frost patterns had changed overnight, less intricate now, retreating in delicate lines as if making room for something else. She sipped and watched the light grow. Imbolc was not finished with her. She knew that now. The message had been clear, even if its details were not. The light needs hands. Myra turned that phrase over and over in her mind, testing its weight. Hands could mean many things. Baking bread for a neighbor whose stores ran low, mending fences after the thaw, reading aloud to the lonely, teaching a child the comfort of routine magic, how to stir intention into soup, how to notice when the world was asking for gentleness. Her gaze drifted to her bookshelves. Perhaps it also meant stories. She felt a spark of excitement at that, small but bright. Stories were seeds, after all. They taught people how to see, how to remember, how to hope without demanding certainty. Myra set her mug aside and pulled her notebook from the table, flipping it open to a fresh page. The paper was crisp, expectant. She hovered her pen above it, listening. Outside, a bird called, just one experimental. Myra smiled and began to write. Not spells, not plans, just observations. The way the light had changed this morning. The feeling of being accompanied without being crowded. The sense that something ancient had placed a quiet trust in her care. She wrote until her fingers ached, until the fire burned higher and the snow in the bowl had become clear water. When she finally stopped, she leaned back, blinking, surprised by how much time had passed. The light outside was unmistakable now. Morning had arrived. Myra rose and wrapped the loaf of bread again, tucking it into her basket along with a small jar of honey. She did not yet know where she would take them, but she knew she would. Before leaving, she paused at the altar, touching the snowdrops once more. Their heads had lifted slightly overnight, petals no longer bowed quite so low. Yes, she whispered, I see it too. She opened the door, stepping out into the crisp day with purpose settling into her bones. The path ahead remained snow-covered, the world still winter-bound, but beneath it all something stirred, waiting to be tended. And Myra, young witch with red curls and ink-stained fingers, walked forward into the light that was only just beginning to return. The snow muffled her footsteps as Myra followed the narrow path away from the cottage, basket balanced easily against her hip. The air was sharp enough to sting, but it felt clean, like a truth spoken plainly. Each breath filled her chest with clarity and with something else besides, a quiet sense of being guided, not pulled, just accompanied. The village lay a short walk away, nestled in a shallow hollow where chimneys clustered close and fences leaned companionably toward one another. Smoke curled lazily upward, pale against the brightening sky. Morning sounds were beginning to stir, wood being chopped, a door creaking open, the distant lowing of a cow greeting the day. Myra slowed as she approached, letting herself feel the place before entering it fully. She had lived near the village for years now, close enough to be known but far enough to remain slightly apart. People came to her when they needed salves or charms, when a child's fever lingered too long or a garden refused to thrive. They brought eggs and apples and gossip in equal measure, and they left with gratitude that felt both heavy and light in her hands. Today felt different. Not urgent, just meaningful. Her first stop was the old stone well at the village's edge. It predated the cottages, the paths, perhaps even the names of the hills. Myra set her basket down and rested her palms on the cool stone rim. The water below reflected the sky faintly, trembling as if aware of her gaze. "Good morning," she said, feeling faintly foolish, and then less so when the water stilled. She drew a small vial from her pocket and dipped it carefully, murmuring a blessing not to change the water but to thank it for remaining, for patience, for depth. When she corked the vial again, it felt warm in her hand despite the cold air. Myra straightened just as footsteps crunched behind her. "Morning," came a voice, hesitant but kind. She turned to see Elin, the baker's daughter, bundled in a scarf far too large for her, flour smudged along one cheek. She couldn't have been more than 16, her eyes already tired in the way of people who rose before the sun. "Morning," Myra replied, smiling. "You're up early." Elin shrugged. "Bread won't wait." Her gaze flicked to the basket. Is it Imbolc today?" "It is," Mira said gently. Alin's shoulders eased just a little. "Ma'am said it was a good day for beginnings." "She's right," Mira said. She reached into the basket and drew out the loaf, its crust golden and fragrant even in the cold. She wrapped it once more in the linen and held it out. "For you." Elin blinked. "Oh no, I." "For the ovens," Mira added, "and for whoever needs it most." That did it. Elin smiled then, wide and unguarded, and accepted the bread with careful hands. "Thank you," she said, "really." Mira watched her go, warmth blooming in her chest that had nothing to do with magic. The morning unfolded slowly after that, as mornings often did when allowed to be themselves. Mira stopped by the shepherd's fence to check on the ewes heavy with lamb. She tied a length of red thread to the gate, not to ward off harm, but to remind whoever passed that life was close at hand, even now. At the edge of the woods, she knelt to brush snow from a patch of ground where green insisted on peeking through. She did not coax it further. She only acknowledged it. "I see you," she whispered again, and meant it in a dozen different ways. By the time she turned back toward home, the basket was lighter, her steps slower. The sky had softened into pale blue, the sun still weak but present enough to cast shadows that stretched and shifted like thoughts forming. Halfway along the path, she stopped. There it was again, that gentle pressure, that sense of being noticed. Mira closed her eyes and listened. The feeling came not as images this time, but as direction. A tug, not forward or back, but inward, towards something she carried rather than somewhere she needed to go. She frowned slightly, thoughtful, then laughed under her breath. "All right," she said, "all right." When she reached the cottage, she did not go inside right away. Instead, she circled it slowly, fingers trailing along the stones, the window frames, the old marks carved into the lintel by hands long gone. She paused at the back, where the land dipped gently and the snow lay thinner, earth already dark beneath. This would do. She fetched her spade and worked carefully, turning the soil just enough to break its surface. The ground resisted at first, then yielded, crumbly and alive. Mira's breath fogged as she worked, curls escaping their pin once more to brush her cheeks. When the hole was ready, she reached into her pocket and drew out the vial from the well. She hesitated, not from doubt, but from reverence. Then she poured. The water soaked into the soil, vanishing almost immediately, as if it had always been meant to be there. Mira placed her palms flat against the earth, feeling the faint warmth beneath her skin. "This is not an asking," she said quietly, "only an offering." The ground answered, not with words but with a feeling of acceptance, deep and sure. She sat back on her heels, heart steady, mind buzzing softly with possibility. There was more to do, she knew that, more listening, more tending. This was only the first stitch in something larger. Behind her, the cottage door creaked as the wind nudged it open. Mira glanced back, then rose and went inside, already reaching for her notebook. The story, it seemed, was far from finished. The cottage felt different when Mira stepped inside, not changed exactly, but attentive, as if it had shifted its weight, ready to hold something new. She set her basket down and shrugged off her shawl, hanging it on its familiar peg. A curl fell loose into her eyes. She tucked it back absently, already halfway elsewhere in her thoughts. The notebook lay where she'd left it, open on the table, the ink still faintly glossy where her words had dried. Mira stood over it for a long moment without writing. There was a particular kind of listening required now, deeper than noticing signs, quieter than intention. This wasn't about doing the right thing. It was about letting herself be shaped by what was unfolding. She added a log to the fire and sat, pen resting between her fingers. Outside, the day continued its gentle work. Snow slipped from branches in soft sighs. Somewhere down the path, voices drifted, laughter, the creak of a cart wheel, life moving forward whether she watched it or not. Mira began to write again, slower this time. She wrote about thresholds, doors, wells, moments between sleep and waking, about the feeling of being trusted by something vast and patient, about how light didn't arrive all at once, but in increments so small you only notice them in hindsight. She paused, reread the last line, then underlined it once. A knock sounded at the door. Mira startled, not because she was afraid, but because she hadn't felt it coming. That alone was unusual enough to make her heart skip. She set the pen down carefully. "Yes," she called. The knock came again, tentative. Mira crossed the room and opened the door. A woman stood there, wrapped in a travel-worn cloak dusted with snow and road. Her hair was dark, streaked with early silver, pulled back in a practical braid. Her eyes sharp, observant, tired, lifted to meet Mira with visible relief. "Thank the light," the woman said. "I was hoping I hadn't missed you." Mira blinked. "I'm here." "I know," the woman replied, lips quirking. "That's why I came." She hesitated, then added, "My name is Rowan. I was told you keep a good fire." Mira felt the words land like a stone, dropped into still water. "Come in," she said, stepping aside. Rowan entered, pausing just inside the threshold. She didn't immediately remove her cloak. Instead, she closed her eyes briefly and breathed in, shoulders lowering a fraction. "Feels like a place that listens," she said. Mira smiled faintly. "It tries." Rowan opened her eyes and studied Mira more closely now. Her curls, her ink-stained fingers, the copper charm at her throat. Whatever she saw seemed to satisfy her. "I didn't come for healing," Rowan said, as if answering an unspoken question. "Not exactly." "All right," Mira said calmly. "Then what did you come for?" Rowan's gaze flicked to the altar, to the snowdrops, to the low-burning candles. Something softened in her expression. "I'm looking for someone willing to tend what's been neglected," she said. "Someone who understands that not all wounds bleed, and not all beginnings announce themselves." Mira's pulse quickened, not with fear, but with recognition so sharp it nearly hurt. She thought of the embers in her dream, the well, the water vanishing into the soil. The light needs hands. "I might be," she said slowly, honestly, "but you'll have to tell me what you mean." Rowan nodded, as though she'd expected nothing less. "Good," she said, "because the road that brought me here doesn't end at your door, and I suspect yours doesn't either." The fire crackled, louder than before. Mira gestured toward the chair by the hearth. "Sit," she said. "Have something warm, start at the beginning." Rowan hesitated only a moment before unfastening her cloak and doing as she was told. As she settled into the chair, the lines of travel and wear eased from her face, replaced by something closer to resolve. Mira poured tea, hands steady despite the quiet thrill coursing through her veins. She handed Rowan the mug, then took her own seat opposite her, notebook within reach. Outside, the light continued to grow, slow, persistent, undeniable. And somewhere between the firelight and the steam curling from their cups, a new thread began to weave itself into Mira's life, careful and deliberate, promising neither ease nor harm, but meaning, deep and patient, waiting to be tended. Rowan cradled the mug between her hands as if she needed its warmth to anchor her. For a moment she only stared into the steam, watching it curl and vanish again. Mira waited. Some beginnings required silence to find their footing. "I've been walking for 3 days," Rowan said at last. "Not because the distance was far, but because the land kept delaying me." Myra's brow furrowed slightly. Delaying how? Paths that should have been clear were flooded. Bridges washed out though there been no rain. I slept in places I hadn't meant to stop. Rowan let out a breath that was half a laugh. "At first I thought I was simply tired. Then I realized I was being slowed." "Guided," Myra offered gently. Rowan glanced up, sharp eyes softening. "Yes, that." She took a careful sip of tea and nodded approvingly. "Chamomile." "And lemon balm," Myra said, "for steadiness." "Me thought so." They sat together like that for a few heartbeats, the cottage holding their quiet without pressure. The fire popped, sending a spark briefly aloft. Rowan's gaze followed it, thoughtful. "There's a place," Rowan began again, "north of here, not far as the crow flies, an old place. Older than the well at the village edge, older than most names anyone remembers." She paused. "It's failing." Myra felt something inside her shift, like soil loosening around a root. "Failing how?" she asked. Rowan's mouth tightened. "In pieces. The stream that fed it has gone erratic, freezing when it shouldn't, flooding when there's no melt. Animals avoid the area now. People too, though they don't know why. They just say the air feels wrong." Myra closed her eyes briefly. Images flickered unbidden. Water refusing its course, roots grasping blindly, light caught and scattered instead of held. "And you," she asked quietly, "why do you care?" Rowan met her gaze squarely. "Because I was asked to." The words settled heavily between them. "By whom?" Myra asked. Rowan hesitated, then reached into her cloak and drew out something wrapped in faded cloth. She unrolled it carefully, revealing a small stone, smooth, dark, etched with a spiral not unlike the one on Myra's copper charm, though older, deeper, worn by centuries of touch. "This was left on my doorstep at midwinter," Rowan said. "No tracks in the snow, no note, just this, and the sense that if I ignored it, something precious would be lost." Myra leaned forward despite herself, breath catching faintly. The air around the stone felt dense, not dangerous, but weighted with intention. "May I?" she asked. Rowan nodded. The moment Myra's fingers closed around the stone, warmth bloomed against her skin. Not heat, exactly, recognition. She gasped softly before she could stop herself. Rowan's eyes sharpened. "You feel it?" "Yes," Myra whispered. "It's familiar." She didn't know how else to explain it. The stone felt like the well water soaking into earth, like embers beneath soil, like something waiting patiently for the right hands. She set it gently on the table between them. "This place you're speaking of," Myra said slowly, "it's not broken, is it?" Rowan's lips curved faintly. "No." "It's forgotten," Myra continued, "or neglected." "Exactly." Myra leaned back, heart thudding, not with fear but with the dawning shape of understanding. She thought of the message she'd received by the hearth. The light is returning, but it needs hands. Not one pair of hands, she realized. Many, but someone had to begin. Outside, the sun finally crested the tree line, spilling pale gold through the window. It struck the stone on the table, and for a brief moment the spiral seemed to glow. Myra swallowed. "When do we leave?" she asked. Rowan studied her for a long, searching moment. Then she smiled, not triumphant but deeply relieved. "Not today," she said. "Imbolc is for noticing the spark, not burning it all at once." She lifted her mug in a small salute. "Tomorrow, if that suits you." Myra nodded, a quiet excitement unfurling in her chest. "Tomorrow," she agreed. She reached for her notebook again, fingers already itching to write, maps, questions, fragments of dreams not yet understood. The story was widening now, branching outward, roots reaching for something long unattended. And though the path ahead remained unseen, Myra felt certain of one thing as the light filled her cottage, and the fire burned steady at her back. This was only the beginning. The rest of the day settled around them like a well-worn shawl. Rowan stayed, of course. There was never any real question of it. Myra set another place at the table as naturally as breathing, and together they moved through the cottage in a rhythm that surprised them both. Two people who had not met before this morning, yet worked side by side as if some quiet agreement had already been made. They baked first. Myra kneaded dough while Rowan chopped dried apples and nuts, the knife thudding steadily against the board. The scent of yeast and warmth filled the air, softening the sharper edges of winter that still clung to the walls. As the loaves rose near the hearth, Myra told Rowan about the village. Who was kind, who was lonely, who pretended not to need help but always lingered longest when given tea. Rowan listened more than she spoke, filing details away with careful attention. "You notice things," Rowan said at one point, brushing flour from her hands. Myra smiled faintly. "Someone has too." Later, while the bread baked, they stepped outside to gather kindling. The snow had softened under the midday sun, its surface glittering like crushed glass. Rowan moved with the ease of someone accustomed to long roads, while Myra walked more slowly, pausing to touch tree bark, to observe the way the light caught on ice. "You walk like you're in conversation with the world," Rowan remarked. "I am," Myra said simply. Rowan considered that, then nodded, as if adding another truth to a growing collection. They returned to the cottage with cold-reddened cheeks and a small pile of fallen branches. As Myra stoked the fire, Rowan examined the shelves of books, running her fingers along the spines with something like reverence. "You've read all of these?" she asked. "Not yet," Myra said, "but I will." Rowan smiled at that, an expression touched with longing. As afternoon leaned toward evening, they sat by the hearth and spoke more quietly. Rowan shared fragments of her own story then, not everything, but enough. Years spent traveling between places that sat just outside maps, listening for disturbances most people dismissed as coincidence, stepping in when something old and vital had begun to fray. "It doesn't always want fixing," Rowan said carefully. "Sometimes it wants remembering." Myra felt the words settle deep. "Yes," she said, "that's what it feels like now." The light faded slowly, lingering stubbornly along the horizon. Myra lit the candles again, one by one, their flames steady and sure. Supper was simple, bread still warm, honey drizzled thick, soup made from roots and herbs saved for this exact season. They ate in companionable silence, the kind that deepened rather than pressed. When the bowls were cleared, Myra fetched an extra blanket and handed it to Rowan without comment. Rowan accepted it with a nod that carried more gratitude than words. The night outside had changed. Not colder, quieter. The moon hung higher now, its light cleaner, less hesitant. Myra felt the shift immediately, that familiar tightening and release beneath her ribs. Another threshold. She rose and stood near the window. "Something listening again," she said softly. Rowan joined her, gaze steady. "It's been listening all along. Tonight it's waiting." Myra pressed her palm to the glass, feeling the faint chill seep into her skin. "For what?" she asked. Rowan did not answer right away. Instead, she reached into her cloak and withdrew the stone once more, holding it out between them. In the candlelight, the spiral seemed deeper than before, shadows pooling in its grooves. For you, Rowan said quietly, to decide how you want to answer. Mira did not take the stone yet. She watched the snow outside, the moonlight, the faint suggestion of movement beneath the earth. She thought of embers dreaming under soil, of hands needed, not in haste but in care, of a path that had not yet revealed itself and a story that had only just learned its own voice. She inhaled slowly. The fire crackled behind her, steady and alive. And somewhere beyond the cottage walls, beneath frost and root and waiting dark, something leaned closer still. Mira reached out at last. Her fingers brushed the stone, then curled around it fully. This time, the warmth that answered her touch was steadier, less startling, like a hand clasped in mutual agreement rather than surprise. She let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "All right," she said, not loudly but with a quiet certainty that filled the room. "I'm listening." The words seemed to ripple outward. The candles leaned just slightly. The fire sighed and settled. Rowan watched her closely, something like respect and relief softening her expression. They did not speak of it further that night. Instead, Mira wrapped the stone once more in its cloth and placed it on the altar beside the snowdrops. She extinguished one candle, then another, leaving only the hearth fire and a single flame to keep watch. The cottage felt held, balanced between wakefulness and rest. When they retired for the night, Rowan took the pallet near the fire while Mira climbed to her loft. She lay awake longer than usual, staring at the ceiling as moonlight traced slow paths above her. Her mind was full, but not crowded, images drifting in and out like fish beneath clear water. Paths, stones, water moving where it had forgotten how. Eventually, sleep claimed her. This time, her dreams were quieter. She stood on a hill she did not recognize, grass flattened beneath frost. Below her lay a shallow valley cupped between trees, mist pooling in its center. At the heart of it stood something that might once have been a circle of stones, or perhaps a gathering place, but now lay uneven, half sunk into the earth. The air around it shimmered faintly, as if uncertain which season it belonged to. Mira did not approach. She only watched, hands tucked into her sleeves, listening to the way the land breathed around the place. She sensed no malice there, only confusion, loneliness perhaps, like a song that had been forgotten mid-verse. When she woke, dawn was already pressing gently at the edges of the world. She descended the ladder quietly, not wishing to disturb Rowan. The traveler slept lightly, one hand resting near the hilt of a knife that had seen long use. Mira smiled to herself and moved to the hearth. The fire still lived. She coaxed it higher, set water to boil, and kneaded a small round of dough from yesterday's leavings. The simple acts grounded her, stitched her back into herself after the dream's lingering pull. When Rowan stirred, Mira handed her a mug without a word. "You saw it," Rowan said after a sip, voice still rough with sleep. "Yes," Mira replied, "or something like it." Rowan nodded. "That'll do." They ate quietly, the morning unfolding pale and calm beyond the windows. Snow still covered the land, but it no longer felt absolute. Patches of earth showed through now, dark and promising. The bowl of melted snow water by the hearth had been absorbed completely into the floor's old stone, leaving only a faint, darker mark behind. Mira noticed, she always noticed. After breakfast they packed. Not much, just what was needed: warm cloaks, bread and cheese. Mira added her notebook and a charcoal stick, tucking them carefully into her satchel. She hesitated, then reached for a small jar of honey and slipped it in as well. "For remembering sweetness," she said, when Rowan raised an eyebrow. Rowan smiled, a wise provision. Before they left, Mira stood once more at the altar. She touched the snowdrops, then the wrapped stone. She did not ask for protection or luck. Instead, she offered a promise. "I'll come back," she whispered, "to the cottage, to the fire, to the quiet life she loved. And I'll tend this too." The cottage seemed to settle around her words, content. Outside, the day waited. They set off together down the path, boots crunching softly, breath rising in pale clouds. The world ahead remained uncertain, the way all honest paths are. But Mira felt steady, rooted in herself even as she stepped forward. Imbolc had opened the door. Now she was walking through it, slowly, attentively, into whatever story was still waiting to be told. The path narrowed as they left the village behind, slipping between hedgerows heavy with snow and branches etched in frost. The world felt hushed but not asleep, more like it had drawn its breath and was waiting to see what would happen next. Mira walked a little behind Rowan at first, letting her set the pace. She liked the sound of footsteps ahead of her, the reassurance of movement and direction. Rowan's stride was steady, unhurried, as if she trusted the land to unfold when it was ready. They did not speak much. When they did, it was about small things. The way the snow had crusted over in the night, the shape of clouds drifting east, the faint scent of water on the air that promised a stream somewhere nearby. Mira found she appreciated that Rowan did not fill the silence just to prove it wasn't empty. As the morning wore on, the terrain changed almost imperceptibly. Trees grew closer together. The air cooled, sharpening around Mira's lungs. Beneath her boots, the snow thinned and darkened, patches of earth showing through like ink beneath parchment. She slowed, frowning slightly. "Do you feel that?" she asked. Rowan glanced back. "I was wondering when you would." "It's uneven," Mira said, searching for the right word, "like a rhythm that keeps forgetting itself." Rowan nodded. "That's the place beginning to make itself known." They paused at the edge of a small clearing. At its center stood a ring of stones, weathered, lichen-covered, half swallowed by the earth. Some leaned at awkward angles. Others lay fallen entirely, their shapes softened by time and neglect. Mira's chest tightened. It was exactly as she had seen it in her dream. She did not step forward right away. Instead, she crouched and pressed her palm to the ground. The soil was cold but not dead. Beneath it, something stirred faintly, like a pulse muffled by too many layers. "It's tired," Mira murmured. "Yes," Rowan said, "and it doesn't know why." They stood together in silence, letting the place notice them. A crow watched from a nearby branch, head cocked. Somewhere deeper in the trees, water moved hesitantly, as if unsure which way it was meant to go. Mira rose slowly. "What do we do first?" she asked. Rowan did not answer immediately. Instead, she reached into her pack and withdrew a small bundle wrapped in oilcloth. She unrolled it to reveal a simple broom, birch twigs bound tightly, the handle worn smooth by use. "We clean," Rowan said, "not to erase what's been here, just to let it breathe." Mira smiled, a soft, almost relieved sound escaping her. "That I can do." They worked side by side, clearing fallen branches, brushing snow from stone, writing what could be righted without force. Mira hummed as she worked, the same wordless tune she'd sung while making tea. The sound wove through the clearing, gentle and persistent. As the stones emerged from beneath frost and debris, the air began to shift. Nothing dramatic, no sudden warmth or blaze of light, but a loosening, a sense of space returning. Mira wiped her brow and stepped back, surveying their work. The circle was still imperfect, broken even, but it was visible now, remembered. She reached into her satchel and withdrew the jar of honey. "For sweetness," she said again, and this time the words felt heavier with meaning. She set the jar at the center of the circle, unscrewed the lid, and dipped her finger into the amber glow. Slowly, reverently, she traced a spiral in the earth, small, humble, deliberate. The ground did not glow. It simply accepted. Mira exhaled, shoulders easing. She felt the faintest answering warmth beneath her knees as she knelt there, the land acknowledging her presence not with gratitude or demand, but with something like relief. Rowan watched her, eyes thoughtful. "This place remembers you," Rowan said quietly. Mira shook her head. "No, it remembers what I'm listening for." She rose and brushed dirt from her skirt, curls tumbling loose around her face. The air felt clearer now, lighter in a way that had nothing to do with temperature. They were not finished. Mira knew that as surely as she knew the sun would set again tonight. This was only the first kindness, the first stitch in a long mending. She looked around the clearing once more, committing every detail to memory. The stones, the trees, the hesitant stream just beyond the rise. "We'll need to come back," she said. Rowan smiled. "I was hoping you'd say that." The crow cawed once, sharp and approving before taking flight. And as the light shifted and the day leaned toward its next turning, Mira felt the story stretch open ahead of her, unfinished, patient, waiting for careful hands to continue. Mira lingered in the clearing, feeling the subtle pulse of the earth beneath her boots. Every stone, every patch of soil, every hesitant whisper of the stream seemed to hold a memory, a quiet story that wanted only to be remembered. She traced her fingers along the edge of a leaning stone, feeling the grooves worn smooth by wind, rain, and time. There was patience here, a patient insistence that what was broken could be held, tended, and slowly made whole again. Rowan knelt beside her, brushing the snow from a fallen branch. "It's small work," she said softly, "but that's all the land asks at first. Small work, steady hands." Mira nodded, yes, and attention. Rowan glanced at her, expression thoughtful. "Some people try to rush it, make the earth answer to their urgency, but it doesn't work that way." "No," Mira said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You have to listen first." They worked in companionable silence for the next hour. Mira cleared brush, adjusted leaning stones, and traced faint spirals in the dirt around the circle, ritual gestures she wasn't certain would change anything, but felt necessary all the same. Rowan tended the edges of the clearing, coaxing fragile green shoots from the snow, brushing aside ice that threatened to pin them down. The sun rose higher, pale and soft, but the clearing seemed to respond to their care more than to its light. A subtle warmth, a sense of quiet watching, drifted through the trees. Mira stopped for a moment, closed her eyes, and felt the land breathe with them. "It's awake," she said finally, more to herself than to Rowan. "Yes," Rowan agreed, "but only enough to notice us. That's all it needs for now." Mira knelt again, jar of honey in hand. She dabbed small drops into the nooks between stones, offering sweetness as a gesture of care, a way to mark attention without claiming control. The honey caught the morning light, glinting amber and soft, and the stones seemed to lean toward it, subtle shadows stretching like hands reaching for warmth. "I can feel it," Mira murmured. "Not like magic exactly, but like recognition." Rowan nodded. "It's not about magic, not the kind most people think. It's about noticing, remembering, tending what's been neglected." Mira stood, brushing snow from her skirts. She looked around the clearing, committing it to memory. The stones, the tiny shoots of green, the hesitant stream, and the way the sunlight struck through bare branches, scattering patterns on the frozen earth. She breathed in deeply, filling her chest with the quiet pulse of the place. "We'll need to return often," she said. "The work isn't done." "No," Rowan said softly, "and it won't be. Not quickly anyway, but it will be steady. And that is enough." Mira nodded. Her gaze lingered on the spiral of honey at the circle's center, the simple marks of care she had made in the dirt and the small shoots that trembled toward the sun. "I think," she said almost to herself, "that this is why Imbolc matters. Not the fireworks or the feasts, but this noticing, this tending, the quiet work that sets the world in motion." Rowan smiled faintly. "Yes, the spark comes first, then hands follow, that's what matters." A soft rustle drew Mira's attention. A fox, slender and cautious, emerged at the edge of the trees. It paused, sniffing the air, then regarded them with amber eyes. Mira froze. The fox tilted its head, then stepped forward a few careful paces before retreating again into the brush. "Not all visitors are human," Rowan said quietly, almost reverently. Mira's heart lifted. "No," she whispered, "but they notice too." The afternoon stretched lazily over them. They cleared more debris, adjusted stones, and tended the small green shoots that pressed insistently against the snow. Each act was quiet and deliberate, a rhythm of care that seemed to echo the very heartbeat of the land. As the sun began its slow descent toward the horizon, casting long, golden shadows across the clearing, Mira paused at the edge of the circle. She placed her hands gently on the earth, feeling warmth where it had been cold, subtle vibrations where it had once been silent. The land was awakening, not fully, but enough to recognize their presence. Rowan leaned on her broom and watched her. "You're good at this," she said softly. Mira smiled faintly, brushing soil from her hands. "I think it's in me. Or maybe it's been waiting in them," she said, gesturing at the stones and the soil beneath her feet. Rowan's smile deepened. "Perhaps both." The sky shifted slowly, the sun dipping lower, casting a soft, rose-gold glow across the clearing. Mira breathed in the faint smell of earth and pine, feeling the quiet hum of life beneath the snow. She had no illusions that the work would be easy, that the circle would be whole by tomorrow or even next week. But she understood now what mattered: attention, care, and the patient repetition of small, deliberate acts. Mira turned to Rowan. "We should make camp soon," she said. "Night falls early this time of year, and I'd rather not be caught unprepared." Rowan nodded, gathering her bundle and helping Mira pick up the lighter tools they'd brought. Together, they walked a few steps into the edge of the trees, scouting a small, sheltered nook where they could build a fire and rest. Mira paused, looking back at the clearing. The stones seemed to hum faintly under her gaze, the spiral of honey glinting in the fading sunlight. She felt a profound sense of patience settling into her chest. This was only the beginning. There would be more work, more noticing, more tending, but she was ready. And somewhere beneath the frost, the earth seemed to lean closer, waiting for the hands that would continue to care. She exhaled slowly, a soft smile brushing her lips, and followed Rowan into the trees, the first steps of a long journey stretching quietly ahead. The sun had fully slipped behind the distant hills by the time Mira and Rowan made camp, leaving the clearing draped in dusky lavender shadows. The fire they built was modest, a circle of stones surrounding a small heap of kindling that hissed and flared to life with careful coaxing. The smoke spiraled upward into the chill night air, twisting lazily around branches heavy with frost, then dissipating into the vast silence beyond. Mira sat cross-legged on a woolen blanket she'd spread over the pine needles, the warmth of the flames pressing gently against her cheeks. Rowan settled opposite her, leaning back on her hands and letting her cloak fall open to absorb the firelight. They had eaten their simple meal of bread, honey, and cheese, yet the ritual of it, breaking bread together beneath the sky, felt weighty, grounding, sacred in a way neither had anticipated. For a long while they simply listened, not to each other but to the night. The world outside their fire hummed softly, the creak of distant branches, the whisper of wind across frozen streams, the faint crunch of snow under the paws of unseen creatures. Mira had long thought that the world itself had a voice, and tonight she was certain of it. "Do you ever wonder," Rowan began, her voice low, "if this work we do, if it matters to them as much as it matters to us?" Mira considered this, tracing a finger absently along the edge of the blanket. "I don't think it matters in the way we expect. They don't need us to fix them. They just notice when someone remembers. That's enough." Rowan nodded slowly, as though the answer had been quietly waiting inside her all along. "Not all work needs applause," she said. "Not all victories are seen." "Exactly," Mira said. She leaned back, letting her head tilt toward the sky. Stars were beginning to pierce the darkness, faint and hesitant at first, then growing bolder. She could see Orion rising in the east, his belt sharp against the dark velvet. Somewhere overhead, a lone owl called, its voice weaving through the treetops. "It's a conversation," she whispered. "Not one we always hear, but one they always remember." Rowan's eyes followed Mira's gaze, reflecting the starlight. "I think that's why you were meant to come here," she said softly. "You listen in a way most don't. You notice what's unseen." Mira smiled faintly, warmth rising to her cheeks beyond the firelight. She did not argue. Instead, she reached into her satchel and drew out her notebook. Opening it to a fresh page, she sketched the clearing as best as memory allowed. The stones, the spirals of honey, the tentative green shoots pushing toward the pale winter light. She drew not just what she could see, but what she had felt. The pulse beneath the soil, the quiet acknowledgement of life, the gentle insistence of patience. Rowan watched in silence as Mira worked, the scratching of the pen against paper blending seamlessly with the crackle of the fire. When she finally leaned back, Mira's eyes lingered on the drawing, satisfied but aware it was only a fragment of the story. "The beginning," she murmured. "This is only the beginning." "Yes," Rowan agreed, "but it's a strong beginning." Mira closed her notebook and tucked it back into her satchel. She turned her attention back to the clearing, where the stones gleamed faintly in the firelight, shadows twisting between them like living things. She knelt for a moment and pressed her palm to the earth. "I promise I will come back," she whispered. "I will tend you. I will remember." The earth seemed to pulse softly beneath her hand, a faint warmth that spoke not in words, but in understanding. She rose, brushing dirt from her skirt, and stepped back to the fire, letting the moment settle around her. They spent the rest of the night tending their small fire, watching the stars and speaking sparingly. Mira told Rowan stories of her childhood, the first spell her grandmother taught her, the way she had learned to listen to the wind, the small acts of care that had shaped her. Rowan shared fragments of her own life on the road, the quiet disturbances she had witnessed, the places that had called for help long before anyone else noticed. And in this sharing, a subtle truth became clear to Mira. The land, the clearing, the stones, the green shoots, they were not waiting for perfection. They were waiting for witness, for care, for a steady presence willing to move gently and intentionally through the world. When sleep finally came, it was slow and deep. Mira curled beneath her blanket, her curls splayed across the wool, and Rowan lay near the fire, chest rising and falling in even rhythm. Outside, the night breathed steadily, the stars watching, the wind humming quietly through the trees. Mira dreamed of the circle of stones once more, but this time it was alive. Each stone leaned gently toward the next, connected by invisible threads of light and warmth. The green shoots had grown taller, bending toward the faint sun of early spring. Water trickled steadily through the earth, humming beneath her feet. She felt the presence of the world, patient, kind, observant, wrap around her like a familiar shawl. When she awoke, the first light of dawn filtered through the trees. Snow lay pale and untouched, and the clearing looked as though it had held its breath all night. Mira stretched and rose, the chill in the air nipping at her cheeks. She glanced toward Rowan, who was already tending the fire with careful hands. "Morning," Mira said softly. "Morning," Rowan replied, voice low and content. "Ready for the next step?" Mira nodded, feeling a thrill of anticipation. She retrieved the stone from the altar in her satchel, feeling the warmth pulse gently beneath her fingers. She knew now that this was no longer simply a clearing, or a circle of stones, or a dream half-remembered. It was a living, breathing thing, waiting for steady hands willing to move with care, patience, and attention. Together they moved to the circle. Mira placed the stone at its center, Rowan brushing away remaining snow and debris. They worked slowly, deliberately, righting fallen stones, tracing faint spirals of honey, and scattering seeds saved from winter stores. Each act was a small miracle, invisible to anyone who might pass along the path, but monumental in its quiet insistence. The sun rose higher, casting golden light over the clearing. Mira felt warmth seep into her bones, not just from the sun or the fire, but from something deeper. The land was awake now, more awake than it had been when they arrived. It pulsed beneath her hands and feet, acknowledging her presence and her care. Hours passed, measured not in minutes but in the steady work of tending. Mira and Rowan paused only briefly to eat, sip water, and breathe. Yet the rhythm of the day felt unbroken, sacred in its constancy. Birds began to return to the trees, their songs tentative at first, then stronger as the clearing welcomed them back. A deer stepped cautiously from the woods, ears flicking, eyes bright, before moving quietly through the underbrush. By mid-afternoon, the circle was transformed. The stones leaned together, spirals of honey glinting faintly in the sun. Tiny green shoots pressed insistently against the cold earth. The stream beside the clearing ran steadily, no longer hesitant, its surface catching the light in gentle ripples. Mira knelt, hands pressed to the soil, feeling the subtle vibrations of life returning. "It's responding," she whispered. Rowan smiled, leaning on her broom. "Not entirely, but enough to remember." Mira nodded, chest full. She knew that their work was far from over. The circle would require tending again and again, through winter, spring, and beyond. Yet in that moment she felt the full weight of possibility, of beginning something that could last, something alive and patient, something that would outlast them both. As the sun dipped lower, the clearing glowed with quiet light, each stone, each shoot, each drop of honey a testament to careful attention. Mira and Rowan sat together, watching the land breathe, feeling its pulse in their hands, and knowing finally that this was the story they were meant to be part of. Not rushed, not forced, but unfolding patiently, quietly, beautifully beneath winter skies and toward the light that always returned. The world was holding its breath, and Mira, young witch with red curls and ink-stained fingers, felt herself part of its heartbeat, steady and unbroken, ready to walk the long path of tending, remembering and bringing light to where it was needed most. The clearing, the stones, the streams, the shoots, all of it pulsed quietly, alive with patience and promise, and Mira knew this was only the beginning of everything yet to come. The night fell softly around them, stars like scattered lanterns above, and for the first time, Mira understood what it meant to be part of the world, not above it, not separate, but utterly and beautifully woven into its story. And in that understanding, she smiled, letting the quiet joy of tending, of watching, of being present, settle into her bones like the first warmth of spring beneath the snow. The world was patient, she was patient, and together they would see it awaken fully.